Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this coverage of my round 3 game of the U.S. Amateur West Tournament. So round 3 was played on Sunday morning. So I had a full schedule on Saturday playing both games, 2 long games, and then I tried to get some sleep that night and got up not so early in the morning, 8ish, and came out for the round 3 game, which started at 10. And so I was a little more tired than I was the day before. I guess the combination of the 2 long games and 2 nights in the hotel had left me a little foggy, but I felt okay during the game. So let's get going here. D4, knight f6, c4. So he's setting up a typical queen's pawn opening here, and I go with e6. I will play the Nimzo Indian if I get the chance. But he goes knight f3, a way of avoiding the Nimzo Indian and the most popular move in this position. And now against this, you can play a number of different setups. You can go with the Bogo Indian, with the coming out with the bishop anyway. You can go back to a queen's pawn, opening the queen's gambit declined. You can play a Benoni here, which is kind of interesting. I've played that before. But my main move here is b6. This is the Queen's Indian defense. I read once that you can get a complete repertoire against d4 just by learning the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian. And so those were 2 of the earlier openings that I learned. And so that's what I go back to, although I haven't played this in a while and I was a little bit rusty. Anyway, we follow the main line for a while. He goes g3. I go bishop a6, kind of a funny move. I remember thinking, what the heck, when I first saw that, because you play this move b6 here, you're normally going to put the bishop on b7 and use that to counter white's bishop. But bishop to a6 has a point. It pokes at this pawn and asks white how he plans to defend it. b3 is a normal move. And then once b3 has been played, it's like there's some dark squared holes here over on the queen side. You can park this bishop here on b4 with check, and white doesn't want that bishop to stay there, so white plays bishop to d2 to chase it away, and now the bishop drops back to e7. So another kind of funny dance with the bishops, and the idea is that you've lured the dark squared bishop, white's dark squared bishop, to this d2 square where it obstructs white's view of the center. The queen would really rather have an open view of the center, and the bishop would really rather be over on the b2 square. So that's the idea, and this has turned out to be a reliable defense. Now bishop g2 immediately asks some questions about what you're going to do on the long diagonal. And now at this point, I had forgotten what the line was. The main line of the Queen's Indian here is to play c6, block the diagonal that way, and then play for d5 and get a solid grip on the center. Yeah, I had just forgotten that, and I was improvising at this point. I noticed that I should probably do something about the threats on the diagonal, and I played knight c6. Now, I think at various times in this game, I didn't find the exact moment, but I remember worrying about this during the game. There are times when the bishop, say if this knight moves away with tempo, the bishop can just trade off this knight, and I have to take back with a pawn, and it would leave me with these doubled queenside pawns, and white might have more center influence. So I was a bit worried about that during the game, but I think it was not something to be worried about, really. This is a good bishop for white, and so it's not clear that white wants to give it up just to double my pawns. And that c-pawn, the doubled c-pawn, still exerts some center influence. So probably I was worried a little bit needlessly about that. We'll see in the game the real problem with this knight on c6 is that it's in the way of the c-pawn, which wants to come forward. And in fact, I end up redeploying that knight later. So that's probably the reason why knight c6 is not a move here. Although looking at it with the chess engine, it's not a move that gives a big advantage to white or anything. So it's still a playable move. It's just not one that's played. It's not in the opening book. Anyway, my opponent castled. I castled. He went queen c2. Now white was not playing the most aggressive way here. He plays kind of quietly in the opening. I'll show one point where white could have improved and maybe taken advantage of my incorrect play over here. So he went queen c2. I went rook c8. And then he went a3. So right here, and possibly even earlier, he could have gotten in the move e4. And that would give actually a significant advantage to white. White would have the big center and easy development for his pieces. The knight's coming out to c3. And so so I think this is a consequence of this knight c6 move. It's blocking some of my counterplay here with the c-pawn. And but white is not taking advantage of it. White plays a3. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned my opponent here is rated 2075. So a strong player. And you know, that's kind of what happens in these Swiss system tournaments. You know, if you score well the first 2 rounds, I was at 1.5 points out of 2. Your reward for doing well is you get to face stronger opposition. So this is my opponent here is rated even higher than my opponent in the previous round. Okay, at this point I didn't see any further use of this bishop on this diagonal, and also this a3 move is setting up the idea of b4 and then b5 forking these pieces. So another reason why this knight on c6 is maybe not the best placed piece. So I drop my bishop back to b7. He goes bishop to c3, and I get in the move d5. That's one of the ideas in this opening, is you eventually want to get in that move d5 and fight for control of the center. Whereas if white had played that move e4 earlier, he could have kind of squashed this play from me. But white just continues in a somewhat unconcerned fashion, knight bd2. With h6, I didn't want his knight hopping into this square. But also I think this was just kind of a waiting move. I wasn't really sure what to play in this position. And so I was kind of looking for a plan at this point. You know, maybe one idea h6 introduces is this knight can come around this way. And maybe that's a useful thing to trade off some pieces here. But really that was just a waiting move to try and figure out what was going on. He played rook f to e1, so he's going to prepare this e4 push perhaps. And now, you know, having recognized after thinking about this position for a while that really it was this knight here that prevents me from making any progress, I played the strange move knight to b8. But actually these moves are not bad, because white has not played aggressively. I've actually got time to complete this maneuver, and knight b8 has the idea of liberating the c-pawn, and it turns out to lead to a position where I get some equality. So he hops in with knight e5, and I get in c5 immediately. And I think I'm doing okay here. He places his queen over on b2. He's lining up for some attack along this diagonal. He could maybe exchange off a few things quickly. But at the moment, my queen and bishop are lined up defending the knight. So this is a pretty solid defense against his queen and bishop battery. So even if there's knight and his pawn, both of those possibly can disappear with tempo, but I'm still holding on here. So I played knight bd7. He took, I took, and let's see. Yeah, at this point, if he takes on c5, opening up this diagonal, my knight's still solidly defended, so it's not a problem here. So anyway, white went rook a to d1, and I went rook f to d8. Already here, I could have opened up the center to my advantage. The chess engine is recommending d takes c4. And then after this exchange, that opened up the diagonal here. Knight takes c4. Taking with the pawn would just leave him with, I would grab, if he were to take with the pawn, I would grab his his d-pawn, and then he would be left with this isolated c-pawn. So knight takes c4 is the better way to play this. But this is a comfortable position for black, actually. The chess engine thinks black is better here. So somehow, in spite of my play, I've managed to come out of the opening with a decent position. I think because white did not play the most aggressive moves, didn't take advantage of his chances early on. Okay, so anyway, he went rook d1, I went rook d8. And the center is going to open up like that in just another move here. He went bishop f3. And I'm not entirely sure what that is about. Maybe he's also looking for some kind of plan. Yeah, I can't really explain that one. So at this point, I decided to exchange off some things in the center. I went with c takes first, bishop takes, And both these moves are okay. I could have taken in either order. Pawn takes, he trades a bishop, queen takes, and knight takes c4. And so we get a position similar to what we just saw, but the d pawn has also been traded for my c pawn. So it's a pretty equal looking position. The chess engine gives still a slight preference to black here, interestingly enough. I didn't necessarily feel during the game that I had an advantage here, but I thought that I was at least equal. And being black against having the black side against a stronger player, about 200 points higher rated, actually more than 200 points higher rated. That's pretty good to have survived this far. And actually I had some ideas for getting active. I played this move queen c6, thinking that maybe I could chase the knight away and penetrate to the 7th rank. And he played rook d3, so his idea, I guess, is to try and activate his rook and bring it over to the king side, maybe get more pressure on my knight. So I decided I needed to strike right away, not delay any further, and I think this is correct. I push on with b5, and it momentarily leaves this pawn hanging, but white has to deal with this threat to the knight. So this turned out to be okay. Knight a5, and now I penetrate with the queen to c2, which was my idea. My opponent said after the game he thought also that I should have considered queen to e4. He said he thought that was a stronger move. It's interesting. I mean, I'm putting pressure on the bishop here. If he takes the pawn, I can grab the rook. Pawn takes, queen takes, so I come out okay. I'm not actually losing material this way. Yeah, I really just did not think of that line at all. And I had played queen c6, the idea of penetrating to the 7th rank here, or the 2nd rank. So I went on with queen c2. Let's see, he played in this position rook e to d1, so he's not in a hurry to trade. He's just lining up his rooks, maybe getting some pressure here. But I thought it would be good to get the queens off. Bishop takes b2. Get rid of one pair of rooks, and then activate my rook to the 2nd rank. And all of this is okay, according to the chess engine. It's actually still keeping some kind of edge to black. So I thought I could feel pretty good about my position, once again, facing a higher rated player. And here he surprised me by playing the move bishop takes f6. And now I had spent a lot of time thinking up to this point, but I really spent a lot of time on this move because there's two ways to take back that bishop. And if I take with the pawn, then he's got two pawns hanging. This pawn is hanging and this pawn is hanging, but my structure will be kind of messed up. And also he has ways of activating his rook. So it's not at all clear cut. And if I take with the bishop, then he can activate his rook more quickly. I think the rook, I'm not making any particular threats. Well, I guess I'm still threatening the e-pawn, but he can also get his rook into the game pretty quickly. So it was really hard for me to decide which way to take. And if you want to think about this, maybe there's a good exercise. I guess there's no real right answer. I'll say that first. Those are the two choices. If you want to think about this on your own, though, it might be a good point to pause the video and think about it. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the different alternatives here. What I played was bishop takes. I eventually settled on that. The line, and the chess engine approves of that. It actually gives that as one of the best choices. My opponent said after the game he thought that taking with the pawn was the stronger move here. And but it's complicated. After I take with the pawn, let's see, b4 is a way of defending the knight and also defending the a-pawn, which I was thinking of going after the a-pawn with my rook, but leaving his e-pawn hanging. And there's this curious sequence. If I take that pawn, then actually this is a losing move, and this sets up a little trap that I might have fallen for. So, interesting way to play if I had gone that way, because knight to c6 hits the bishop, and there's no good square for the bishop. It has to come back to f8. And then knight takes a7. He gets a pawn back, and he's hitting this pawn. And then these pawns over here are solidly protected from my bishop. So actually, white is winning in that scenario. So anyway, after g takes f6, after taking with the pawn, and b4, I need to play something like f5, give my bishop some scope there. And if he penetrates with the rook here, then bishop to f6, he can take the pawn, and I can take the pawn, and this stays about even. So that's and it'd be an interesting game from here. You know, it's bishop versus knight. It's unbalanced pawn structure with the extra pawn for white over here on the queen side. But with pawns on both sides of the board, sometimes the bishop can be a better piece than the knight. I mean, it's definitely a playable position. So to some degree, it's kind of a matter of preference. But I took the bishop here, thinking I didn't want to create any more weaknesses that my opponent could exploit. And I also missed something. So there's a tactic here that I missed when I was calculating how things would proceed, because I thought that he could come in and scoop up my pawns. But what I also thought was that I could win his a pawn as well, and stay at least equal, and maintain pawns on both sides of the board with chances for winning with the bishop versus the knight. So that was my thinking here, and that's what I played. Bishop takes f6. And he went king f1. And my very next move, up till this point, through all of this section of the game, I've been slightly better. Never winning, but slightly better. From the early middle game up to this point, because actually white had the advantage in the opening. But anyway, these things can go in an instant with one inaccurate move. King f1, and I should explain we're in move 28. The time control is at move 40, so I've got to make 12 moves before the time control. And I did spend a lot of time thinking during the early part of the game, and especially on that last move, that whether to take with the pawn or the bishop. That was a difficult decision, and I spent a lot of time on it. And so now I have to move quickly, and I see his king marching over this way, and I just play king f8 almost reflexively. I didn't see that affecting the situation too much, but I didn't want his king to get active over here. Really, all king f8 is doing is defending this pawn against my rook, and I still could have gone after the a pawn there. Although the move here, the chess engine likes, is g5, which not a move I really thought of. But in a way, this is a good example of how you have to shift your thinking when you go from the middle game to the end game, because we're now clearly in the end game, and in the end game, it's important to activate your pieces and get those pawns going forward. And the idea of creating pawn weaknesses around your king side by pushing the king side pawns, that's a middle game concept. In the end game, you want to push those pawns. It gives the king a path into the game that doesn't involve blocking the bishop. And in fact, these two pieces kind of stumble over each other. So, and it also, just pushing your pawns forward in general is good in the end game, as long as you're not too far forward. If you can support those pawns going forward, then that's what you want to do. So a combination of not shifting my thinking, thinking in terms of still these middle game ideas that I had instead of the end game, and also just moving too quickly and somewhat reflexively. King f8 leads to this bad move. He comes to the 7th rank, naturally, with rook d7. And now I play rook a2. And this is the line I'd calculated. I thought I was just winning this pawn. And if you if you want a little tactical quiz here, imagine that rook takes a7 is played next, and I play rook takes a3. What's the problem with that move? See if you can spot the tactic. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. He played rook a7, and now I did not play rook a3, but if I had played it, rook takes a3, he has this check, driving my king here, and this check, and that wins the rook. So that just loses. So I cannot take that pawn. So let's back up. Instead of rook a2, which is making a threat that is not effective because I can't take that pawn once he takes on a7, which he's going to do next. The chess engine says the way to play this is to play a6. This will leave white a little better, but I can hold on. He goes rook a7, say to go after the pawn. I go check, drive his king here. I go back to c2, hitting the pawn again. He goes to f3. And then, bishop d8, hitting the knight. And here's the idea. If he takes Oh, say he moves the knight. It's the same idea in both cases. And I just bring my bishop back. Then he takes. I have this check. So that's the idea, that little rook maneuver drove his king to this square. The king didn't want to go back, or that would just be repetition, and white's playing for a win now. But that means I get this pawn. So I don't go down material. White's a little better, but I'm still have good drawing chances. So that's what I need to play here, a6, with the idea of chasing the king to f3, giving that fork and picking up the b pawn. After I have to chase the knight away too. That's why bishop to d8 is part of that idea as well. So tricky stuff. And as I said, I was already worried about making the time control, another 10 moves to the time control. I didn't have that much time left. So I went rook a2 as I planned. He took on a7. And right here, I did at least do the blunder check, and I realized that taking on a3 was a blunder. So I moved my king again to get away from that tactic. So now my king can come out to the d7 square instead of the e7 square. But, well, now white is just winning. White is a pawn up, and he never lets go. And, in fact, he has more threats here. He comes in with knight to c6, and it's just tough to defend against everything. I bring my rook back. He went knight back to a5. So I just went back. I was happy with the draw at this point. He goes rook to b7, trying a different maneuver. He gives up this pawn, but he grabs the b pawn. So he stays a pawn up. I drop my rook back to a2, trying to keep his king tied up, defending the e pawn. He goes knight to c4 now, getting his knight maneuvered around. Let's see, I check. Goes here, and went rook b1, getting behind the pawn. Kind of a natural maneuver, but once again played a little too quickly. It actually, the best move here is just going back to a7. Okay, 7, king f3, defending the pawn. And then, I'm sorry, rook a7 to defend the second rank. I'm sorry, I was thinking I was attacking there, but of course the king is coming here just because it wants to get into the game, not to defend the pawn necessarily. Okay, I play my king up to e7. That was a point of rook a7, getting my king off the back rank. Let's see, he can get his king all the way to e4, and I can bring my rook over to d7, try to keep his king out. So this is a slow game that I'm just trying to cause as much trouble as possible. But eventually, white, it looks like, will be able to organize and get that pawn passed. So it would be tough to defend that. But that's the best play according to the chess engine. I went rook b1 here, and he went to rook to b7, cutting my king off and looking at the f pawn over here. So I went bishop to e7 to block that. I mean, he had the idea of the immediate knight check, right? When my bishop's here, the knight check wins the pawn. So I had to block that. And then he hops his knight into e5. And now this comes with some annoying threats, particularly rook to b8 is nearly mating me. I have to block with my bishop, and then he can start coming after my pinned bishop with his knight. It's not entirely clear, but it was getting very tightly wound up. So I gave up another pawn here. I played bishop f6, trying to chase his knight away and thinking maybe he will lose the b pawn, but he manages to hold on to everything. Plays knight takes f7. We got rook e2 now, hitting the e pawn. He went knight d6 check. Went king to d8. Went king to f3 there, defending his pawn. I placed my rook over here, d2, hitting his knight, trying to chase it around. He played knight e4, and that I resigned at this point. It's I can move the rook, but he's going to grab the bishop, and it'll just be a rook and pawn end game, 2 pawns up. So anyway, a long game and a disappointing finish there, but well, good play by my opponent. He didn't do anything special in the opening. He just kind of waited for the end game there and waited for me to make a mistake. He did pose some difficult questions for me, so I burned up time on the clock, and then he took advantage of my few inaccuracies. So after 3 rounds, I'm still at 1.5 points out of 3, so 50%. And I'm still doing okay in terms of rating, because it's 3 of my three opponents, two were higher rated and one was lower rated. So the 1.5 is pretty much par for the course. I mean, it depends on the details of how much higher rated and how much lower rated, but I think I'm doing okay so far in this tournament, and I should get an easier opponent in round 4. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you then. Bye.